rather than a broker, as the word you use is consultant.
Yeah.
I hear that time and time again, that you really have to be that strong advisor, that consultant to the clients to stand out and show that you can really bring true value to them and think outside of the box.
Hello, and welcome to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast, a show that cares about healthcare. Each week, we sit down with some of the top industry minds to discuss how this healthcare system works, what solutions actually deliver results for employers, and how do everyday Americans get access to better and cheaper care. So whether this is your first day on the job, or you're a grizzled industry veteran, or if you even randomly stumbled upon this podcast, I promise you that this show is full of information to help you understand this crazy world we call U.S. healthcare. So thanks for tuning in to the Self-Funded with Spencer podcast. Let's go make healthcare better together. That I'm not nervous to do anything, but even I did a little box jump video that I posted because my wife is like, let's see how high we can box jump. The whole time I'm thinking, am I going to pull something? Am I going to tear my Achilles? Like, that's how my brain operates these days. Because I have friends in my age range that are doing silly things like that. And you go like, is it a matter of time till it happens to me? You know,
tore my ACL, I'm going to have surgery. Yeah, it's not.
I had a friend tore his calf playing pickleball not too long ago.
Exactly.
Like, I don't want to do that stuff.
No.
So what is something you used to do outside of horse riding that like is too risky for you these days? Were you a skydiver or anything crazy like that?
More like paragliding, or something like that. Like, I would be the first person on a trip to be like, yeah, let's go jump out of a plane. Let's go paragliding. Let's, get into something that we can't do anywhere else. And now I'm more like, is that really exactly what I think
they call that wisdom. I don't know if it's being risk averse. I think that's just wisdom, because you're cognizant of the potential risks involved, and if something bad happens, you know the reality of that, right?
Yeah.
So that's just being smart, in my opinion. Yeah. Are we ready to go? I figured as much. Yeah, cool, awesome. Well, I'm here with Shelby Cowley. You're the managing director of Midcap Advisors, right?
Correct.
Nailed it. Okay. Even you told me 5 minutes ago, and I managed to remember that. But so thank you so much for joining me. Really appreciate you coming on, and thanks to Seth Denson and John Powder for helping make this introduction.
And on your birthday. So
and on my birthday. Yeah, we don't have it, but Nathaniel bought me a soccer jersey that has the podcast name on it and the sponsor logo, so I'll definitely be sporting that soon.
Yeah, I feel honored to be here on your birthday.
You were my birthday guest, 42, which is like not exciting in any way, shape, or form, but thank you still for being here. So Shelby, what are we going to talk about today? I think we have a pretty interesting conversation. So before we get into your bio, I'd like you, just for the audience, to position maybe what some of the subject matter is going to be.
So everything M&A, right?
Everything M&A,
From valuations to how do I perpetuate my business, whether that's internally, externally, how do I grow myself via M&A if there's an interest there. How do I maximize the total value within the organization, and all the questions in between?
Yeah, well, I think this is really cool. I think I told you before we got connected, or when we got connected, the best performing podcast I've ever had actually isn't really insurance related at all. It was one that I did on private equity 101. And so there's obviously a lot of interest in that space. But what I love about this is we're going to specifically talk about mergers and acquisitions inside of the world of insurance, which is fascinating to me. I suspect a lot of the audience that I have, at least for the show, will find benefit in this as well. And I think the really interesting thing is that you've moved from representing the buy side to the sell side of the equation, right? Which is going to be an interesting conversation. But before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit, some of your background, work history, all those cool things.
Yeah.
So where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Northwest Indiana in Valparaiso, so Midwest girl through and through. More recently, as we talked about, moved to Scottsdale. But other than that, I've lived in the Midwest my whole life. I went to school at Indiana University, did my undergrad in finance and accounting, did my MBA with a specialization in financial analysis, got my CPA license as well, and then started my career in Chicago.
Well, did you know you wanted to get into this space?
So it goes back a little bit into personal history. So growing up, I lived with my grandparents, and we had a small family business, a lumber company. And as part of a small family business, it's more than just a business. It was an extension of our family. I remember on Fridays handing out the paychecks to all the workers, on for the Christmas parties, everyone would come together.
Yeah.
My grandfather would typically dress up as Santa and have everyone's kids come. So it was just a big part of, my childhood and what grew me into the individual I was. My grandfather was the reason I went into business in the first place. But sadly, he got diagnosed with early onset Alzheimer's at the age of 62. And I was in college at the time, in business school. And this was 2008, 2009 financial crisis. And being in the construction industry during that time, not the best space to be in. Yep. So we found ourselves in an unfortunate place that a lot of business owners can find themselves in a forced sale, right? It was not the plan for us to sell at that time. But because of my grandfather's diagnosis, we had to sell. And we really didn't get the value out of the business that we deserved to. And that was a representation of everything my grandfather worked for. So that really led me to say...
Well, that obviously was a pivotal moment in your life, it sounds like. Had you had any interest, while you were in college and this was happening, to maybe participate in the business more formally in the future or take over? Was that a possibility? Or?
I think it was always in the back of my mind that I wanted it at least as an option, right? There was so much associated with that business. It had our family name on the door. So many of my childhood memories, are wrapped up in that business. And I learned so much around how to act as an individual and as a professional through my grandfather's enrollment in his company. But for me, that was taken, off as an option. And so it really led me to focus more and more on M&A and saying, how do business owners protect, what's typically their number one asset, their business, long-term for their family, for themselves, and make sure that they get the value out of that organization.
When we come around full circle to what you're doing now, I'm sure obviously that has shaped your desire to help sellers, whether in a situation that is somewhat distressed or hopefully more optimally when their business is running well, to help them get maximum value. Yeah. But I just think about somewhat of the psychology of that, and I'm sure everybody in that equation probably deserved more, but circumstances that life present us sometimes are out of our control, especially not just the health issue, but also the conditions of the marketplace at that time. You're never going to forget that, right? No. And so I wonder if, I'm not getting too much in the psychology here, but when you represent sellers these days, I'm sure that's fusing or fueling a little bit of your role. But so once that happened, you finished your schooling. Did you immediately go to work in M&A in the insurance space, or were there jobs in between? Yeah,
so I started my career at Ernst & Young. Most people out of business school, I think, end up at one of the big four firms. I was there for about a year, got my CPA. You have to work in the industry for a year. And then I quickly moved to private equity. And then I found myself through a recruiter talking to a firm called Acrisure, which was M&A, but in the sector of insurance. What resonated for me with that model was they were really focused on the entrepreneur. So it took me back to that, memory of having the business kind of sold while I was in college and saying, hey, there's an option for folks to sell their company but still be involved in the business, not lose the name that's on the front door. Their staff is still continuing to be involved, but maybe they get to take some chips off the table, have access to additional resources and capabilities to allow them to really enter that next phase of their career. And so I joined Acrisure in early 2017 and was on their M&A team in the roles of director and VP of M&A for nearly 7.5 years. So
you did quite a few transactions during that time, didn't you?
So I personally completed 187 acquisitions on their behalf.
In what? So that sounds like what, about a 5-year period? How many years total?
Yeah, in about a 7-year period.
Okay, 7-year period, okay.
And that's how I met John and Seth.
Is that a normal volume of transaction? No. I mean, it sounds like quite a bit. Okay, I don't have any context for it, but I'm thinking, man, that sounds like a lot of transactions.
Yeah, during that time, Acrisure was the most acquisitive group in the space. They grew from, $700 million of revenue to north of $4 billion in revenue during that window. A lot of that via M&A. And it was a great run. I got to work with such amazing business owners and entrepreneurs and helping them figure out that next path for them. And I'm lucky that now, as Acrisure is out of that phase of their sole, primary focus being growing via M&A. I kind of did my job there. They're at size and scale now, and I've taken a step back to say, how do I continue to do what I love, being M&A, leverage everything I learned on the buy side, and help business owners and entrepreneurs really maximize that opportunity for themselves when they go to sell or transact.
Chronic health issues, surprise out-of-network medical bills, inflated medical and prescription drug prices. These issues cost self-insured employers hundreds of millions of dollars every year. Add to this the rising cost of care and potential for waste across the life of a claim, and it's clear that self-insured employers need innovative solutions that lower their health plan spend. At Valence, we've done just that, developed innovation that shifts the current paradigm. A complete and integrated ecosystem solution driven by data, one that manages and simplifies the complexity of medical claim costs. It is through analyzing millions of data points that we enable employers to realize and fuel cost-saving solutions. Valence experts come prepared from day one, targeting the fraction of claims that will drive the majority of health plan costs. That is how our team lives the Valence promise, engaging early and often for smarter, better, faster healthcare.
Interesting. So I'm sure you learned a lot during that period of time, but let's talk about both sides of the table, because now you've obviously moved over, but you're developing relationships with the folks that are being acquired simultaneously, because there's a level of trust and reassurance that not is it just a good deal for them financially, but they're going to be as a part of an organization that they want to be a part of. And all those factors. But if we'll just start on the buy side of the table, what does an acquiring firm, at least during that period of time, like Acrisure, what are the things that they're looking for in an agency to acquire?
So first and foremost, in this industry, it's relationships always. So it's the individual, the business owner and their team that is the most valuable asset through and through. So for any acquirer, they want to understand, what is that business owner looking for? Are they looking to continue to stay involved in the business? I always say that really, when you're looking to sell, if you want to maximize the value, you should be doing that 7 years before you really want to step away. Yeah, so it is a lot earlier than most people think. I think oftentimes they're like, well, I'm not looking to retire, I'm not looking to slow down. In fact, you don't want to be at that stage when you're looking to sell. You want to be on the upswing. You want to be focused on growth and have a lot of runway left in you to really maximize that total opportunity. And we can talk about that more. But so people first. Size always plays a factor into deals. There's a correlation between size and valuation. Profitability, but I don't have people focus on what their profitability is now, as a business.
Why is that? Well, because I think profitability to me might be one of the most important criteria. Why is it less of an importance in your mind right now?
It is, and I think owners should always have that in the back of their mind, but as you're operating your business as an independent owner, one key area of focus is lowering your tax bill and operating efficiently in that way. So, but when you're going to sell, you want to maximize the profit. So some of those things that you can and should be putting through the business for tax purposes today, you don't want to do that during a sale process. So having someone kind of help you comb through what can and cannot be included and how to present your business is crucial to maximize that total valuation. So that's profitability does play into it. And then organic growth. Organic growth is huge. It is the key word right now. So you have to be growing to get a top tier valuation for your company. And that's why I say when you're on that upswing, not at the peak of that growth, but continuing to grow is important. If you have niche area of expertise or certain capabilities, I always say, whatever your clients, find attractive about you and the reason they want to work with you is the exact same reason that a buyer is going to find you attractive and want to acquire your agency. What differentiates you? What sets you apart in the marketplace?
Well, and you said, I know talent is a big part of it, but you said even the likability factor, perhaps over coffee, so the likability of the owner, right? I mean, is this a person we want to do business with? Is this a person that would roll up and be a good representative of the acquiring organization? Are they dynamic? are they a good salesperson? All of those things factor in. And I guess obviously the inverse is true as well. If yes, you have a great business, but you're just an unlikable curmudgeon, that might possibly lower your valuation potentially as well.
Completely, right? Egos can kill all, right?
Yeah.
So you may have an amazing business, but if you can't work well with others, if you've got this great expertise, but they know that they can't bring you in with other clients because you're hard to work with, that will definitely impact the valuation. So there's this factor of saying, you got to be a good person, do the right thing. We've got to get egos in check. We all know egos really run in this industry, and that's great. For the most part, that can really help and drive and make sure you're growing the business and play into that sales factor. But in the sales process, we want to make sure that you present well and that you are likable, so that you have the most options for the business.
Yeah, and obviously that would help with the valuation as well. But we've seen, or at least my perception is that M&A activity has slowed down a little bit, and part of my perception is perhaps that's cost of capital, inflation, things like that. You kind of said it hasn't slowed down that much. Maybe it's a little below its peak, but still really, really rife with activity nowadays. And so talk to me about, if you don't mind, a little bit that's going on in the market, some of the market dynamics for acquisition at the moment.
Yeah, I would say in terms of activity, while maybe the volume is down in terms of total deals, the valuation is still at an all-time high, right?
Okay.
Because there is that much demand, if not more, than there's ever been, but there's also far less supply of agents coming to market, right? The majority of independently owned agencies are those that are less than $1 million in revenue. So maybe those are new entrants in the space, someone that left a former employer to go start their own group. And are more in that scale period of their life cycle. But everyone is interested in continuing to grow via an M&A, so that's helping those sellers really get the top tier valuations that continue to exist right now in the market.
Okay, right. And so even though the volume is down, so the metrics, if you will, around multiples and things like that, still high.
All-time high.
So, I've got to ask this question because I don't know a lot of the information about valuations of businesses, how a buyer evaluates the strength of that business, things like that. So what are some of those key metrics, if you will, financial metrics specifically, that they'd look for?
Yeah. So what I do with folks is I start by wherever you're at in the life cycle. I start with performing kind of that free valuation on your business. So I look under the hood and say, where are you at today? Where do you really want to be going forward? And let's back into how do we get there. So some of the factors that someone will be looking at besides just the person and the products that they're selling, and who that entrepreneur is saying, what are the growth factors? What is driving that growth? Are you great at, have you developed this referral network that's feeding your business going forward? There's nothing greater than free business based on word of mouth, right? That not only speaks to the caliber of service and support that you provide to your existing clients, but also the type of partner that they're going to get within the organization. So how are you growing? How are you driving that growth is key. In terms of the overall profit of the organization, we all know that the key cost in any insurance business is compensation, right? So I work with you to understand where are your compensation numbers at now, and how do we get them into a bucket that's more market within that 40 to 50% range. And then all the other operating and sales costs that go along with that. And then areas of expertise. So if you're thinking about, should I be a generalist, or should I really focus on one specific industry? It really depends on, your specific geographic market and where you'll have the most opportunity for growth. But anytime you have an opportunity to really become an industry or vertical expert, there is a valuation enhancement for that. The old saying, niches make you riches.
Niches make you rich is one of my favorite sayings. And it's absolutely true though, right? Because there's fewer competitors in that space. But you said that you can niche down so much though that you're like the only person that can do that thing, and then it becomes an actual constraint rather than an additive piece. So what's an example of something where it's like so niche that somebody wouldn't want?
Well, this is outlandish, but if you only, sell insurance for bicycle shops or something like that, right? There's only so many.
Even if you own the bicycle shop space, okay.
Right? That could be a great vertical, but you have to be mindful of, how niche-y do you get, right? Because there needs to be an opportunity for continued expansion and growth, beyond just what you do in your current marketplace.
Well, how does an approach start then? Because I know everybody in the consulting world, whether they're running an agency or high up in an agency, I'm sure people are knocking on doors all the time, because they want to acquire their business. So what is the first kind of steps of approach? Let's again focus on the buy side since you have so much background there. Like, how did you open a door to start having a conversation like that?
Yeah, usually with my network. So with folks like John or Seth of saying, hey, we partnered with you in the past. Who do you know within your own network that still owns their agency that might be a good fit for Acrisure, for example, right? And that's what most buyers do, is say, who, do they know within their own organization that could help them add to that organization? And so that's usually that first in there. But as I'm sure anyone listening to this that owns their own agency, they're probably getting a ton of emails almost weekly, voicemails, cold outreaches from acquirers, from other M&A advisors in the space saying, you should sell your business. Here's the valuations. They splash those, headline multiples of 20 times or et cetera, just to get you to have those conversations.
ClaimDoc is a medical claim auditing and member advocacy company. We provide fiduciary services to employer-sponsored benefit plans, and allowing them to create an environment where we ensure that the benefit plans are being charged on a fair and reasonable basis.
My business is basically people, and it become a real simple transition. We thought it was going to be far more complex. I've saved, we'll say, hundreds of thousands of dollars. I could not say enough about ClaimDoc.
Yeah, and so a business owner, if they're being approached quite often, like what's going to differentiate in their mind, if you will, an approach, right? Or how are you so skilled at being able to get those things done? Like the positioning would be kind of helpful, because that's great if you're in demand, but it's also kind of noisy, I bet. And so how do I distinguish a good buyer from a bad buyer then?
Yeah, that's where having someone like myself, an M&A advisor, to help you sort through. There's over 40 PE-backed acquirers in the space today.
40?
40,
wow.
yes.
Okay.
There are a ton of acquirers out there. There's the publics, there's the private equity backed, there's the regionals, there's the local groups. So understanding what are my options, first and foremost, what is the space and what is the landscape? Understanding what are my goals out of the transaction. So I always start there of saying not only the dollars that you want to get out of the business, but what are the other important factors to you? Is it important that you join up with a group that's going to keep you and your team employed long term? Do you care about the name on the door, or do you not?
Yeah.
Do you care about the resources that they bring to the table, or do you care more about the potential equity position of joining a group that maybe is going to grow at 500% over the next 5 years and being able to partake in that? So there's many factors that could drive why I would choose one buyer over another. So having someone to help you, one, educate you on who all is out there and who might be the right fit for you based on those different factors that we would rank, really helps you then narrow it down to say, okay, maybe there's really a handful of 4 or 5 of them that I would seriously consider, and then it becomes much easier, right?
Well, and I imagine too, some of these independent agencies that are going up against the big boys and big girls might go, I'm never selling to X, right? I will never talk to them.
I hear that all the time.
And then they go, oh, wait a second, actually that sounds like a pretty good number, but I'll change my mind,
Yes,
right?
it's funny that you say that, because so often people, have this idea in their mind of, no, I don't want to be with a big box name, and then they see the valuation, and then they're, they have to seriously think about it. But that's where too I come back to them and say, valuation at the time of close is great, but there's so much more to that partnership, especially when you're going to be around for the next 10 to 20 years still in the business. Let's talk about the total package. Let's talk about the earnout incentives, your compensation, what life will look like. Will you still enjoy going to work post-closing with the right partner and helping you ask the right questions to really find, is this the right fit for me long term?
Yeah. And I think it'd be fun let's contextualize this in terms of like maybe an example deal, right? Because I think if I'm a consultant listening to this, I have interest in selling my business. I know what at least I make on an annual basis, and I have maybe a ballpark range of what my business could be valued at. But it'd be fun to kind of create a reality check, if you will. So it's October of 2024, in case somebody's listening to this episode 7 years from now. But in the current world, when we think, listen, we use words like multiple. Are we talking a multiple of EBITDA? Are we talking a multiple of revenue? What's the common metric for valuation?
Both.
Both,
So that's
okay.
where it gets confusing, right? There's so many numbers out there. There's all these multiples.
Well, and even if you want to explain EBITDA, since you have an accounting background, please.
Because folks, they're not operating towards EBITDA, which EBITDA is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization.
Mm-hmm.
It's the difference between how you're operating today versus how you would be valued on an operating basis going forward, including all those adjustments. But what's easier to look at is the multiple of revenue, because everyone knows revenue.
Yep.
And when I'm saying revenue, I really mean commission and fee revenue plus your bonus, not premium dollars.
Yeah, of course.
So,
yeah.
when we're looking at that,
I hope some consultant doesn't believe their business is valued on how much premium they bring in.
You'd be surprised.
Okay, really? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
When folks talk revenue, sometimes they're talking premium revenue because that's just the way in which they're focused on operating.
Fair. I mean,
right?
fair, right? But obviously, that's not how much they take.
No. So generally speaking, I think a good valuation is anywhere at closing. I'm talking about the dollars you take away at the time you close
So what
the
goes into your bank
transaction.
account,
Yes.
right? I mean, well, obviously we'll talk about the tax component, but at close, how much my business earns. Okay.
We should be driving towards a 4 to 5 times revenue range.
Okay. So we'll take $1 million number because that's easy to think about. So if I have $1 million of revenue today, I should hope to get somewhere between $4 and $5 million at close for my business. Okay.
Yes. And that, there's factors that play into that. So
I want all the nuance to that. Please add that to it. But at least that in my mind gives me, okay, I know that my business does $2 million a day. So, okay, maybe it's 8 to 10 million somewhere in there. Okay. But okay, so let's dig into that further.
Yeah. So on that $4 to $5 million example, right, you have to have continuing leadership involved in the business. You can't be stepping away. There has to be growth within your organization. You have to be operating at a certain profit, which I would help, get to that go forward profit. So those are the most important factors in that. And then, what drives that value up is also things like size of the business, niche expertise, other component, if someone's really interested in a certain geographic area, that's booming, there's a lot of opportunity for future growth. That can drive the valuation as well. If you've got a young team, anything that really makes your business stand out does impact the valuation as well.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, you're going over this and I'm thinking about underwriting and stop loss for a minute. There's there's a manual rate and then there's all these adjustments based on certain criteria. It sounds like the underwriting process is not too dissimilar in M&A.
No, very similar. There's the art and the science, behind it.
That's why I love stop loss. It is art and a science. But okay, so let's say, all right, at close, my business is worth $5 million, and that's what I receive. Tax implications. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but people should be aware, right? And then just because that number is what is stated doesn't mean that's what's actually going to land in your account after taxes and things like that. So what else do I need to factor in?
So that's where when I do that valuation exercise with anyone, I start with, here's the number at close, but here are all the factors that go into it. Here are all the costs associated with the transaction, from attorney fees to E&O tails, all the way down to your taxes. So can't avoid taxes, unfortunately. Those taxes are generally long-term capital gains rates. I'm not a tax advisor. This is not tax advice. But long-term capital gains rates should be applied, federal and local cap gains rates. We generally pair you up, though, if you are serious about transacting. We'll make some recommendations, if you don't have one, for a strong tax advisor. There are some creative ways to help defer taxes over time, but that's generally, 20 to 30% range is what someone should expect from a tax perspective out of that closing consideration. But that's just one component of the deal, right?
Yeah, that's just so that's the start. And you said most deals, you told me this over coffee, most deals are structured in a way that's either somewhere between 70 to 100% cash up front, but there's also typically an earnout period as well, right? So let's explain what an earnout period is.
So that earnout period is anywhere from 1 to 5 years post-closing, most typically 3 years from the date of closing. That earnout opportunity, it can be as lucrative, if not more, than your total closing consideration. It all is generally growth dependent.
Okay.
Some buyers have completely uncapped earnouts, meaning the more you grow, the higher that payment will be, and there's no limit to it. Others have caps within a certain range, so maybe up to 30% growth, they're going to cap it at that. But generally speaking, you have to grow at least 3 to sometimes 6% growth on top line revenue. And for every dollar above that growth, they're generally going to pay you a multiple on that growth.
Really? Okay.
So it's a pretty lucrative back end opportunity. And that's why I say when you're thinking about selling, you need to be on that upswing, right? Because the good thing is if you find and align yourself with the right partner, they're going to take the time and resource that you're spending on the business away from all the owner tasks, like, being the HR person, IT, the accountant within the organization. And instead of going from maybe you're focused 40% of your time on selling to 100% or 80% on selling, you want to make sure you have the energy and the desire to go out and crush that earnout opportunity. Because like I said, it can be as much, if not more, than the consideration.
So after that period, there's another liquidity event of some sort where you're earning money based on your growth? Or
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it could equal or be higher than what they got in cash.
Yeah, if you're a great grower, that earnout incentive should not be overlooked. It can be very, very lucrative.
And then the inverse, though. So what happens if I don't hit those targets?
Yeah, so if you sell and unfortunately you're not growing post-closing, you have the initial consideration at closing, you have your continued compensation for staying involved in the business. And then if you took any equity within the organization, hopefully, even if you're not growing, that entire organization is continuing to grow and scale. And so then you have the appreciation and upside of that stock. Often that stock too has dividends associated with it and some other added incentives.
Well, so I'm hearing you. So there's cash, there's the continued compensation. Does that usually stay in the form of commissions and fees that are structured in deals, or does it get replaced by a salary of some sort? Or?
So if you're in a sales role today, they're going to want to keep you in a sales role going forward. So therefore, they don't want to fix your compensation. They generally want you to be on variable compensation at a market rate. So whether that's 40% new, 25% renewal, all the way up to 40, 40-40, 30-30, depending on the buyer, it will be that variable mix though.
Okay, so that having the variable incentive continues to push you to grow, right? So you have variable comp on an annual basis. You're incentivized with the earnout. So I want to go over those again. So you've got the cash, you've got your ongoing compensation, you've got the earnout potential, and then also any equity that came in the form of stocks or dividends, things like that. So
Pareto Health is the largest benefits captive in the United States. With nearly 3,000 captive members, 1.3 billion of stop-loss premium in force, and almost 1 million covered lives, no other benefits captive comes close to Pareto Health's scale. But it's not just about the numbers. Pareto Health is a mission-driven organization, and that mission has two distinct parts. Number one, to make self-insurance simple and more accessible for small to mid-sized employers. And number two, to arm them with the most powerful cost management tools on the market. So if you're an employer frustrated with your healthcare outcomes, or you're a benefits consultant looking for an alternative to the status quo, it's time to consider Pareto Health. Pareto Health, where employers come to do self-insurance right, to do it easily, and to do it at scale.
Well, so Shelby, one thing I'm thinking about is, we're talking about red flags, but like, what if I go through the transaction, I sell, I'm happy with the money I got out of the initial transaction, I'm in my earnout period, and I'm just like, you know what? I don't like this place. It wasn't as advertised. The culture's not a fit. And I want to walk away during that earnout period. Like, have you had that happen before?
So, fortunately for me, no.
No, okay.
But I mean, that's a good reason too why to work with someone to help you really evaluate who is that person you're joining. It does happen though.
Okay.
Right?
So what would be the implications for the person who does walk away in that situation after they sold their business?
Yeah. So generally speaking, it depends on the buyer, but oftentimes that earnout structure is based on performance goals, not necessarily your continued employment. So there is the potential that you could still receive some earnout if the business is continuing to perform and exceed those goals after you've stepped away. Obviously, you're walking away from your compensation package and you are tied and aligned to whatever restrictive covenants were part of that acquisition. So generally, that's talking about 3 to 5 year non-compete from the time that you step away. So, That's, I think, a worst case scenario. Hopefully, if they're walking away, it's they're walking away to retirement or change, and not because it was just really a bad culture or strategic fit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's got to be a rare circumstance, but that's not to say it doesn't ever happen. I mean, I'm sure people have seller's remorse just as much as they have buyer's remorse, some situations. But that 3 to 5 year limitation on or non-compete, so that's at the point what point? The initial transaction?
So generally there's two components to it. It's 5 years from the date of sale and 3 years from the time that they cease being employed at the company.
Whichever's less or greater?
Longer.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yeah. So you definitely have to be ready to walk away from this business altogether then. Yeah. Which makes a lot of sense, right? Although, somebody's young and really successful and had a chance to sell earlier on and maybe didn't get a huge number, but still has energy left to run a business, they're just going to have to wait it out or do something different for a period of time, I suppose.
Well, hopefully they find the right fit long term, right? Where they get this energy back. They've taken chips off the table. They're, focusing more on the areas that they enjoy in the business, like selling, less on operations, and they have this new energy and excitement around the role. And so generally folks tend to stay much longer than they had originally anticipated.
Really?
Yeah, because there is that new energy, there's that new excitement and upside. And it's just, when it's not the full stress of running and operating the business and every decision you make has a clear impact on your family and take home, and you've taken off that risk through a sale, that job becomes a lot more enjoyable and exciting. And when you can tap into other resources,
the light doesn't light at the end of the tunnel, right? Yeah.
And when there's a culture fit, and now suddenly you get to maybe move up market or work on some more strategic, types of clients or opportunities, that opens up a whole new window for folks that maybe they didn't have before.
Well, speaking of family, have you ever done any transactions where it was a multi-generation business, and so son or daughter might be taking over, but then they go through a transaction? Do you help with sort of succession planning?
3 of my clients right now their children are involved in the business. All 3 of them, their sons are involved in the business, but they're younger, right? Maybe they're late 20s to mid 30s. They do want to continue to stay involved in the business, but when you're talking about these types of valuation factors, one, do you really want to saddle your child with that amount of debt to get the value out of the business that you've built? But 2, where's the best place for them long term? The industry continues to move towards consolidation. So can you align them with a group where there's upside, not only in terms of resources, but more growth and opportunity from a professional level? Are there opportunities for promotion and maybe bigger roles within a company that they wouldn't have today? Do they get to become a shareholder in that larger organization? Do they get the earnout and upside potential with that group? So it allows them to really perpetuate to that next generation while also aligning that next generation with the tools and resources to allow them to be successful long term and getting them money, capital, and upside instead of debt at the time of
because you're saying the other side is my dad's got an agency, I want to take it over, I don't have the money to pay him what it's worth, so then I have to take on a bunch of debt in order to finance that deal, right? Okay. Then if I don't do a very good job of operating the business, I've now saddled it with a lot of debt, and maybe I'm losing business left and right at the same time.
And you have to hit those certain performance goals to get that money out and pay, your father or mother back. But that's not to say that that's not the right fit. I do help clients with internal perpetuation and succession planning too. A sale is not always the end all be all for everyone. Everyone has to find the right fit for them.
Yeah, and so on the subject of debt, and then I want to ask you about kind of the positioning of who's a real good fit for you and your services. How are most of the big deals being financed then? I mean, obviously, if your time at Acrisure, is it a lot of being financed with debt? Is it some cash, some debt? Like, what's the actual engineering behind the financing?
A lot of them, it's with private equity capital.
Okay.
Right? So, of course, there's debt on the balance sheet too, to help with that. But generally speaking, a lot of these groups have private equity infusion. That is the majority that PE investment is with the mandate of to help them grow via M&A or
see.
acquisitions, and to scale in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to take us down a tangent, but I remember talking about my buddy. I told you, the one that
Yeah.
does private equity. He manages a family office fund. You know, he was just talking about the different ways to finance deals and arbitrage and financial engineering, and it was just really interesting to somebody that's not in that world. But I mean, in this interest, we've covered a lot of ground here. Somebody that's listening to this and go, I like Shelby. She clearly knows what she's talking about. Maybe I'm a good fit for her, but I don't know for sure. So when you look at a as an ideal client, if you will, or an ideal prospect for your services, what does that business look like?
Yeah, so I would generally say if you're in the insurance or financial services sector, you think we would be a good cultural, kind of fit, work well together, feel free to always reach out. I'll be pretty transparent around what advice I can help you with, where you're at in that life cycle for your firm. Generally speaking, the majority of my clients, if they're not looking to sell right now, it's about helping them with that long-term plan of getting them ready to that maximum valuation and point where they are ready to sell. For me, my clients typically need to be at least $1 million in commission and fee revenue at the time that they're looking to sell. So you may not be at that point right now, but before you sell, you generally do need to be at that level.
Okay. Is that because just kind of your fee structure or minimums and stuff like that? And then who would be maybe an entity that's potentially just larger than your target market? Is there a top end of that revenue?
I mean,
you would work on any size deal, probably.
I would work on any
let's
size
be fair,
deal, but
right?
let's, the McGriff deal that's going on right now, I'm not
you
on
weren't
that
involved in that one.
transaction. Yeah.
Yeah, but you see those numbers, and what was it, like $7.5 billion or something like that, and then there was the Aon NFP acquisition earlier this year. I mean, these are humongous numbers, right? Which everybody gets excited about. But I think I asked because in the space that Pareto operates, we're dealing with small to medium-sized businesses, right? We're not working with Fortune 10 employers, right? So we sort of know where we fit, and we want to deliver value to that size segment. Having spent years working alongside healthcare leaders, brokers, and employers, I know how overwhelming healthcare can feel for our customers. We've all been there. Those renewal conversations that never seem to get easier. Rising pharmacy costs and medical costs, and no real transparency into where healthcare dollars are going. That's why I'm excited about Nomi Health. They're not just fixing the old system. They've rebuilt self-funded benefits from the ground up. With Nomi's network, you can offer something truly different. No copays, no deductibles, zero out-of-pocket costs when members see a provider. It's the kind of benefit that makes everyone ask, why hasn't healthcare always worked this way? Ready to bring your clients something different? Visit nomihealth.com and see how Nomi is rebuilding healthcare, one employer and one community at a time. And then other things that really factor into the cultural element or what you're looking for outside of the size of the business. What else would you say?
Yeah, I would say someone that really is looking for a long-term partner. I, of course, can help folks through retirement or through, when they're at closer to the end of their life cycle for their career. But generally speaking, someone that is open to kind of hearing some constructive feedback, is willing to make some changes and think about things differently, with the mindset that I will always do the right thing by my clients. I am focused on getting you what you want out of the business, and I will care about your business as if it were my own. So making sure there is that level of trust that we can develop with each other.
Yeah, and why should I not represent myself? Why should I have a seller's representative? What are the things that I would be missing if I try to do it on my own?
So going back to that EBITDA, right?
Yeah.
So one, negotiating, there's two factors that really play into that overall offer. It's the EBITDA that they're bidding off of, and then that valuation. A valuation multiple of 15 times on $1 of EBITDA sounds great, or 15 times sounds great, but if it's $1 of EBITDA, that doesn't really make sense for you to do the deal. So you need someone to help you negotiate what is that starting EBITDA or that starting pro forma in a way that we know will be confirmed by the buyer, so you get the most out of the acquisition. And then all of the things that a buyer, having been on the other side of the table, I know the key factors that help drive the difference of a 4 times revenue valuation and 5 times revenue valuation. What are those factors that maybe you wouldn't know to present in a management meeting, but I would know to highlight and make sure you're getting credit for those factors? And then it's all a negotiation, right? You only go through a sale transaction once. You want to make sure you have someone representing your best interest and getting you the highest valuation possible while also finding the right fit for you. The biggest reason why not to go at it alone is you're leaving dollars on the table.
Well, that makes sense. And you even gave me an example, which we don't want to get into any specifics, but you gave me an example of a situation you were able to help raise the valuation pretty significantly in a short period of time because you sort of knew what to look for. And even though they got a decent number before, you got them a much better number. In and of itself, that's a good reason, right? It's the same reason why I deployed the same real estate broker, husband and wife team for our sell and our buy of our houses, because the strong belief is they will do a better job and get us better value on both sides of the equation because of their skill set, right? And they're compensated for that. It seems no different.
Yeah, I'm directly tied to the dollar out that you get. So I don't get paid unless you get paid and unless you choose that buyer. So there's no forced sale. I am highly incentivized to make this the right fit for you long term and get you the most dollars out of closing.
We call that an alignment of incentives, right? We need more aligned incentives in this business. All right, so I warned you ahead of time, kind of the 2 questions I typically like to ask, but thank you so much for doing this. This is
it's my pleasure.
Fascinating to me, and I hope one business listening to this goes, I want to deploy Shelby's services because she knows what she's talking about, but you've just educated a significant number of people, so I hope you realize that. But I usually like to ask, because you spend at least a significant amount of time in the employee benefits transaction space, so you sort of see the landscape of the economy at large. I think you mentioned to me earlier that this business is really well insulated from downturns and upturns in the economy. But like healthcare at large, do you have a sense of what are some of the things that like maybe your clients are worried about or what they see in the future? This whole idea of healthcare in the United States, like where are we heading? Are we going to be all right 5 years from now? Like, what's your general sentiment about our jobs and our economy?
Yeah, well, as I stated at coffee, I think we're in the best industry in the world. Obviously, I'm biased, but I think the healthcare and insurance space is a great space to be in. I think what's interesting and what I hear from a lot of clients now is that, rather than a broker, as the word you use is consultant, I hear that time and time again, that you really have to be that strong advisor, that consultant to the clients to stand out and show that you can really bring true value to them and think outside of the box. More personally, I think preventative healthcare is where I'm focused and where I see a lot of my clients trying to help with their clients on that preventative side of healthcare too.
Yeah, I think it's in the public discourse right now, right? This idea of making America healthier, better through policy. So I'm talking about food supplies. But I think the general sentiment I have about the consultant landscape is that their responsibilities keep growing, right? The amount of things they're being asked to do by their clients, it keeps growing. So that makes them even more valuable to the clients when they're good. Absolutely. But at the same time, that also raises the standard of what a consultant is supposed to be. And so you might see some shakeout of those folks that are having difficulty keeping up with the marketplace demands.
Absolutely. And that's another reason why folks sometimes come to me, because they are kind of in a position where, hey, I really need to partner up because while I, love being independently owned and operated, I don't have all the tools and resources that I need to be able to bring to my clients to remain competitive long term when, someone down the road has all of the resources that they can bring in a clinician, they can bring in different tech and tools to their client basis and help them win and attract that group.
That's awesome. And so last question, and then you're off the hot seat. I usually ask just for a basic, closing thoughts, right? If maybe it's a summary of what we've covered today, maybe a key point that you want somebody to leave with, but what was a closing thought that you might have for the podcast?
Yeah.
Usually the hardest question, by the way, too. It's like summarize an hour of talking in one line, right? Yeah.
I would say don't be fooled by the multiples that you hear and see. Really try and get to an understanding of what is my business? What are my goals out of it? And then work towards that end game number that gets you excited.
Very cool. Great way to sum it up. So Shelby, thanks you again for traveling down here and doing the podcast. It's been a real pleasure to sit and talk to you.
Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Yeah, I'm 42 now, guys. Great. But thanks again, and maybe we'll do this a couple years down the line after you've had a lot of success.
Yeah, awesome. That'd be great. Thanks, Spencer.